Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. It's going to take a few seconds to get everyone into the room, but welcome. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Multicultural Open Houses, the Community Initiative Open House. You're welcome to send questions through the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. If we're not able to get to your question by the end of this session, you can reach out to the Community Initiative or the admissions office after, and we'll make sure you have that information in the chat window. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared after the meeting on the Multicultural Open House website. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Dean Birdwell Howard of the Community Initiative in the Yale College Dean's Office. Welcome.
Hi, folks. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever we're finding you. As Moira said, my name is Birdwell Howard. I'm the Associate VP for Student Life here at Yale and a Senior Associate Dean in Yale College. And it is my pleasure, and one of my areas of responsibility is working with our community initiative for first-gen and low-income students here at Yale. You know, as you can see on the screen, I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm happy to kind of kick things off, and I will let my colleagues introduce themselves as we move forward. So what is the community initiative? So the community initiative is Yale's effort from an administrative perspective to support and empower first generation and low income students. You'll hear us say FGLI, and that is the first generation to college and low income students. And our goal is really to support students socially, creating community, academically to make sure that they're able to demonstrate their brilliance that got them into Yale, and support them financially. This is a collaboration between the Yale College Dean's Office, where I'm based, and the Porvu Center for Teaching and Learning. We partner with our students and student organizations as well, but from an administrative standpoint, these two administrative offices really make up the community initiative.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. Thank you, Dean Howard. My name is Jorge Anaya, and I am the Woodbridge Fellow for the Yale College Dean's Office and the Porvu Center for Teaching and Learning. I'm also the coordinator of the community initiative. So I more or less just work on the day-to-day actual operations of the community initiative. We're super excited to have y'all here and just have this opportunity to share what the community initiative actually does on campus. But prior to that, we wanted to just give y'all a bit of background for ourselves as individuals, more or less how we ended up at Yale, and basically why Yale was the right decision for us as individuals. I have the fortune of being able to work with a team of student ambassadors, 4 of which are currently on the screen, but only 2 of them were actually able to be present today on this webinar. As you all know, we're living in a pandemic world and things pop up at the last minute. So we're just rolling through with it. And that's just the nature of how the last few months have gone. But quick introductions. Again, Dean Howard, he's the Associate Vice President of Student Life and the Senior Associate Dean of Yale College. I'm a Woodbridge Fellow currently in my 2nd year. I originally graduated in class of 2019. And with us today are also 2 student ambassadors, both seniors. One's name is Esther Reyes, class of 21, and Alejandro Nuno, class of 21 as well. So just to get more of an indication of where we are, where we come from, we thought it'd be a good idea to talk about our paths at Yale. Starting off with Dean Howard.
Sure, thanks, Jorge. You know, so as you can see, you know, the narrative, the fiction is that it's a straight line from wherever you're from to, you know, being a Yale grad. You know, some of you may have seen the ads for a candidate for the Senate in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison, who is one of our alumni, who is running for Senate right now. And he talks about, you know, how he earned his way into Yale, and he's got pictures of graduating. you know, all of us have a more realistic pattern where we take stops and turns, and sometimes it's just dumb luck that kind of presents us an opportunity to go to college and end up at a place like university, like a university like Yale. For myself, you know, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, so I'm a native New Englander. You know, my folks, I was fortunate, my parents both were able to attend college. You know, but we didn't have a lot of money. And so I was definitely a kind of a low income student coming out of high school. You know, the opportunity, you know, my folks were teachers and worked for the post office. But, you know, the idea of going to college was definitely always on the radar. But, you know, the whole college process was kind of mysterious, and it was very different from what they experienced. And so I was really kind of on my own to make my kind of college choices. And so, you know, I kind of talked to friends and talked to my guidance counselor and remember what, you know, people a year or two ahead of me, the schools that they had looked at, and that started to form my list. You know, and, you know, I had my heart set on one school and I got waitlisted, and I ended up at another school, and it actually ended up being the perfect fit for me. So, you know, I did my undergrad at Dartmouth College and then went on to do my graduate work at Stanford. But it was all the steps along my career, I think were really kind of fortuitous. You know, a conversation with a teacher, you know, when I was a student as an undergrad, a conversation with my class dean is how I ended up on this path of working in student life and university administration. So I've worked at small liberal arts colleges, medium-sized research universities, and the reason I really found my way to Yale is it's the perfect mix of those two things. I really love the intimacy in the small community of smaller colleges, and you know, a place where you can be known. And I love the idea of being someplace where people from all over the world are going to be coming together, speaking different languages, different perspectives, different countries, and really excited about the exchange of ideas. And so Yale is a liberal arts research university. And Yale College is the crown jewel in that, where the undergraduate experience happens. And so for me, coming to Yale, and this is my 6th year at Yale, working in the dean's office and working with our first-gen low-income community, Yale was the perfect path for me because it blends the intimacy that you experience in the residential college and clubs and organizations and activities with kind of the whole world will show up at Yale's door or through the computer screen this year. But the idea that, you know, at any given day, you know, we just had a celebration of our 50th anniversary and 150th anniversary of coeducation at the university, 50th at the undergraduate college. And we had a talk with Hillary Clinton and Amy Klobuchar, who are both graduates of the university and the law school. And so this idea that, you know, undergraduate students, graduate students, staff have an opportunity to, you know, pop into a conversation with esteemed graduates like that. That's the beauty of a place like Yale. And so it's exciting to be here, and it's really exciting to get an opportunity to work with students like Alejandro and Esther, and then hopefully many of you. I'll kick things over to Jorge.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dean Howard. And just want you know, we're all super happy that Dean Howard was able to eventually find his way to Yale and see that this is the right place to be. But yeah, a little bit more about me. I'm actually from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised in the city of Wilmington, which is right by the port of Los Angeles. And to be quite frank, I never really even considered Yale like growing up. I think being an LA native, I was always super enamored by the idea of attending UCLA or USC or any of the great schools that are available in California. And for that reason, I never really considered Yale, much less the East Coast. And kind of how it ended up happening, I have an older sister who's 2 years older than me. And when she was applying to schools, she actually applied through QuestBridge. And if any of y'all know how QuestBridge works, it's basically you apply to become a QuestBridge finalist, and then they waive all the college application fees for up to 8 schools, or at the time when we were applying, there was eight schools. And then it's a ranking system. And basically, because we're from California and we're super close to our parents, my parents were just like, no, like y'all have to stay somewhere in California. And eventually, like my sister was just like, all right, Stanford is my top choice. Like that's the way it is. And that's the way that she planned for it, like for a few weeks. Then the day that the actual application was due, for whatever reason, we were just talking about schools, and I out of nowhere was just like, what about Yale? And she was just like, yeah, like what about you? So very last minute, she ended up choosing it as her number one choice. And then a few weeks later, she found out she was matched through Yale with Questbridge, and she decided to go. And when I was first looking into colleges, I still didn't really consider Yale. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go to, university or college with my older sister. I thought that was a little weird. I wanted that independence, and I wanted to just like have my own life in a way. We had gone to the same elementary, middle school, and high school, and now I was going to follow her to college. Like that was absurd. And also back then I was just like, there's no way Yale's going to think of me to be like a qualified candidate. So why am I even getting my hopes up, But one thing that I remember very distinctly is how my sister talked about Yale, and how when she came back home, she would use certain rhetoric to talk about the university. And she would always say like, oh yeah, like back home like this, or back home this. And she would be using the word home to reference like one of the residential colleges where she lived. And I remember just feeling super jealous. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like home's with us. Like there's no way that like home is somewhere 3,000 miles away with people you just met. Like you've been there for a few months. Like that's kind of absurd. So when I was applying to colleges, I really realized that something that I really longed for and something I hoped to acquire once I was at a different campus was just that feeling of home and that feeling of being with people that you just felt so comfortable with. So I ended up applying to Yale just through Questbridge as well, and I got matched. And even though I got matched and it was my first choice, I still wasn't set on it. I still thought that there was a part of me that wanted to stay in California. And lucky enough, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Yale and visit campus. And actually, just for the first time in 2 years, even though my sister had been a student there for 2 years, it was my first time actually ever seeing the institution, seeing campus. And it was my first time even traveling like in a large flight and going by myself somewhere. And it was just like this very like in awe experience of what this institution was. And honestly, like quite frankly, I walked a few steps here and I just immediately fell in love with the campus. And I could see what my sister saw in it. And for me, like that's what I wanted. And luckily that's what I obtained. I love my 4 years here at Yale. Were they difficult? Yes, of course. Any institution's hard, and any institution come with challenges. But overall, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunities that Yale has given me, and just the fact that I'm able to now work as an administrator and help other first and low income students navigate their Yale experience and find their home here as well is something that I am very grateful for. But yeah, that's basically how I ended up at Yale. And for a bit more background to like how I ended up with this fellowship, I was very interested in just helping other first and low income students. It can be a very difficult place to navigate. And I wanted to use my personal experiences, specifically a lot of my failures, to help other students avoid common mistakes that could be made. And I'm super grateful to be a part of it now. And yeah, I'll pass it over now to Esther.
Hi, everyone. My name is Esther. I'm a senior here at Yale. My pronouns, I use she, her, hers. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, so I am from the East Coast, unlike Jorge. Before, like when I applied to Yale, I actually applied early decision because I really wanted to go here. But I also wanted to get my senior applications out of the way. Like I didn't want to worry about them in the spring, when they're due in March, April or something. Yeah, or whenever they're due. I don't really know the deadlines because I applied early and got in early. But my experience is kind of like Jorge's in the way that I knew someone who had attended Yale. So I did speech and debate in high school, and I was able to compete. I was very lucky that I was able to compete. Yale hosts their annual speech and debate invitational every year, and I was able to compete, I think, my sophomore and junior year. And my coach, my mentor, actually, he attended Yale as well. I think he graduated class of 2007. And so whenever I like would practice in like our little speech and debate room, I would see the Yale banners. And like he graduated from Brantford College, one of the colleges here, Brantford. And I think I was just kind of like fed that like Yale was really good. And I mean, it has treated me really well. And it's close to home. So I just take the Metro North into New York City, and then I just take the subway home. And that's been a really big part of why I've loved it here so much, because when, it gets tough, and we've lived through some like really tough situations on campus, like the students, and like just like nationally, I think a lot of young people are going through a lot. And so like Alejandro and I, we came in the fall of 2017, and so we've like we like became adults and are becoming adults through this school and through a lot of rough moments. But being able to go home was one of like something that was like a really big anchor for me. But I knew that like Yale was so prestigious, and like I was attracted to like how well they would take care of like low-income students on campus. And also very recently, recently in terms of like Yale is a very, very old school, how very recently a lot of changes to like names of things at Yale. Like I remember writing about that in my personal statement and in my supplements, that I really liked how Yale, I don't know what year it was, I think it was 2016 when they changed the name from Master of College to Head of College. And that to me signaled like a shift in like, okay, Yale is, they're like reading the room of the nation, and like it's no longer acceptable for people who are in charge of a college to be called master. And so they changed it to Head of College, and that I was really impressed by that. And also I remember writing about the cultural centers, like how I think in the 70s and 80s it was like, then it was called ethnic counselors, and they've now developed into like peer liaisons for La Casa, the Afro-American Culture Center, the Native American Culture Center, the Asian American Cultural Center. And just knowing that Yale was so rich in history of like students like choosing to make Yale a better place for themselves, but also for future generations, I was very impressed by that. And I think that's definitely something that pushed me into choosing Yale, into applying early in the first place. And yeah, I'm glad I stayed on the East Coast. I'm glad I have seasons, unlike California, well, parts of California. But yeah, there's a lot of students from California here, but there's a lot of East Coast students too, and I'm glad I got that mix in between. But yeah, I can pass it to Alejandro now.
Yeah. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Alejandro. I use pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, his. Like Esther, I'm currently a senior. I'm majoring in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. Yeah, when I'm thinking about kind of like my Yale journey and where it started, honestly, fall of my senior year in high school, I was in a position where I was not thinking about four-year colleges, even state schools. I was thinking about community college. And so I was not thinking about the Ivy Leagues. It's something that I didn't think I was, first of all, couldn't afford, which, there's a lot of misinformation about that, about poor people being able to afford college, especially private colleges like Yale University. There's actually a lot more resources through institutions like Yale to allow that to happen. And then second of all, I just didn't feel like I was good enough. But the thing that motivated me was actually a teacher in high school who told me, I think you have the capability to get into these schools. And there's also things like QuestBridge that you could apply to help you with the financial side of school. And sure enough, I thought, okay, sure, I'll give it a take and apply to some schools in California. But I said, if I can end up going to a dream school or anything, I'll probably be in the East Coast and be an Ivy League. So I applied to Yale, a couple of other Ivy League schools. And when I had the opportunity to come to Yale, one of the things that made it distinct to other schools that I visited is just how much emphasis is on community. And I don't think that there's enough of that. I think it's been reiterated more than once here that college is tough. You know, there's no like if or like there's no doubt about that. The fact is, you got to find the school that has the resources, the community, the support system that will allow you to go above and beyond the challenge that are going to be presented in college. And I think Yale does a really good job in that, in making sure that an environment is such that you have everything you need, despite the fact that it's a tough challenge, for you to overcome that challenge. Things like collaborating in classes and how much that is pushed. Just how much also is pushed the fact that Yale is also an undergraduate institution. And I've seen that personally in the labs. As a biology major, I do research at the medical school, and I'm actually do a lot of work independently, things that I put intellectual effort into, because Yale has such a model based on making sure that students, graduate students, and staff are all collaborating. And I've found that Yale in of itself has allowed me to find communities that are collaborative. Also in the fact that I identify as somebody that's FGLI and also somebody that's Latino man. I use the cultural centers as well, specifically La Casa. So when I came to Yale for Bulldog Days, that's another thing that attracted me, was how there was this emphasis on push for community, especially identities that are not necessarily recognized the entire time. So being a first-time low-income student, being a Latino at Yale, and kind of the fact that, yes, I'm this different person in terms of typically students that have typically attended this institution, but the fact that in one way or another, I find a support system that is also supported by the administration means a lot to me. And I think that's one thing that makes it very, very different, that makes Yale very, very different compared to other campuses, and just the overall experience is the fact that they have everything set up such that it makes for an experience that I think is very, very unique. And going to some of the things that I've experienced at Yale that Esther mentioned in terms of, you know, kind of that Yale changed from master to head of college. I also personally saw that. So I'm currently in Grace Hopper College, formerly known as Calhoun College. So that transition in name into Grace Hopper is kind of just, you know, something that's been very, very special and dear to my heart as well, because I am a member of Grace Hopper College. And just seeing that transition in terms of how Yale and Yale in general is changing due to the fact of interest of students has been really, really special and really unique. So I've been really grateful for the 3 years and now 4th year that I'm here at Yale, in terms of all the experiences that I've had, all the difficulties and challenges that have been presented, but also just the fact that I've learned a lot because of the way that Yale is set up and the emphasis it has on certain things that just make the overall undergraduate experience a lot better.
Great, thanks so much. And I really appreciate just the fact that we were able to learn so much from each individual. Something we really want to reiterate is just, or really focus on, is the fact that everyone's career or journey into Yale is very individual and it's very unique, and there's no like right or wrong way of going around it. I think sometimes there's this misconception that you have to know from a very young age or from a very early time where you're going to end up for college. And that's just not true. And I think various times for a lot of first-gen low-income students, they tend to not even consider institutions like Yale because they assume that these institutions are not considering them. And that's also just not true. So we really can't stress the importance of just going all out for it, because the worst they can say is no, and the best is yes. And there's so many great opportunities that come with that yes. Very quickly, I did want to go over just like Yale standard definitions of what a first-gen low-income student actually entails. So for example, at Yale, being a first-generation student means that the student themselves have parents who did not attend college, whether it be a 2-year or 4-year institution, and at that making an American institution, making them and their siblings their first generation in their families to attend college. If you are low income, you're classified as being low income from being from a lower socioeconomic background. And for the sake of consistency in conversation here on campus, it is defined if you're Pell Grant eligible. So that being said, like those are like the broad definitions of who classifies as a first-gen low-income student on campus. We do use very broad terms in speaking about students like this because there is kind of this fluidity when it comes to defining who and who isn't a first-gen low-income student, and we want to be as inclusive as possible, because there are various like extremes of wealth, and there's also very extremes of student interactions or experiences prior to college and once they're at an institution like Yale. So for that reason, we are very fluid with our definition to be as encompassing as possible. I do want to answer some of the questions that have been popping up in the chat. Someone asked, like, what are some work study opportunities you guys have participated in? That's obviously a really big question that happens or like comes with a lot of first-gen low-income students, because for obvious reasons, there's a lot of financial pressure to secure a job very early into your start of a college education or your Yale experience. I personally worked a lot of different on-campus jobs, from working at local or like from working at university libraries to working for the head of college office. My favorite job that I ever had was working at a local preschool, where I actually got paired up through a course that I was taking as an observer, and then a semester later they hired me as teacher assistant, and I basically got paid to just like supervise and play around with like 4-year-olds, and it was just super fun, and it was a good way to just distract myself from like the stresses of Yale, and I could just basically like escape a little bit. I don't know if Alejandro or Esther want to talk about their current job that that they're doing or other past employment opportunities.
I mean, I could talk to some of the ones that I do right now, and I think, and some of the ones in the past. So in terms of like work study, I think the biggest one, like I said, was that Jorge was like the library job. So it's a really, really good job to get started at Yale, especially if it's your first job. That's really, really lax. And then as you start becoming more involved in the Yale community, you start being more exposed. You start to find jobs that are maybe of interest in whatever you're passionate for. So like being a student ambassador is a paid student job, and we all do it because it's part of our FGLI identity, and we also want to help, but it also helps the fact that we get paid, right? I'm also an academic strategies mentor, and also help with the academic strategies program through the Purdue Center for the Center of Teaching and Learning here at Yale. So you know, I've been able to kind of get jobs in areas that I'm passionate in. Things like research, a lot of times, especially if you're senior, there are fellowships, as well as jobs that will probably pay you for the work that you do in those labs as well. So there are ways to find jobs that are of interest to you in terms of work study, but at the same time are things that you can kind of get out of the way, if you want to call it, hit 2 birds with 1 stone. And then that way, you know, you're able to have more time for things like classes and, you know, things of that matter.
And I can also add a little bit, one of the, like the most fun job I think I've had at Yale was during my first and second years when I worked in the Buttery. And so each residential college has their own Buttery. It's like a late night snack place. Like other students like work there, so I was working with other first years and sophomores, so like people in like, you know, who were also incoming to Yale, and it's just a really fun way to like get to know older students too, because it is really late night. I think they're open from like 10 to 1 a.m. or something, and so I didn't get a lot of sleep those nights, but it was really worth it because you know, I got to make like all sorts of things. Like we would always, like every night there would be cookies and like chicken nuggets and quesadillas and like smoothies, and you know, it was really fun because I got to work there and be a part of my residential college community. And at Yale, I think it's like Yale is a really big school, but a way that Yale makes it a bit smaller is through your residential college, and then in the residential college system you also get like mini communities, and like my mini community for my first and second year was definitely a big part of that, was working in the Buttery, like serving people food and you know, just chatting with them late night when everyone was avoiding doing their homework, which is always fun.
You know, I will say just on the employment, because I see that's popping up, and activities, you know, on average, you know, and this will pop up, I think, in some of the general admissions related questions, but the majority of Yale students come from public schools. You know, I think there is this perception that everybody at Yale is wealthy and went to a private school, and some did, and some are wealthy. But the majority of our students come from public schools around the world, around the U.S. You know, about Maura will correct me in the chat, but I think it's somewhere between 52 and 54% of our students receive some level of financial aid. And, you know, one of the things that I think that Jorge was for our next slide, we were just talk a little bit about who is in the class and the profile of Yale, you know, and since, you know, both Jorge and Esther and Alejandro came to Yale, the profile has changed. And so just by a little bit of backdrop, about 7 or 8 years ago, Yale decided it was going to make the undergraduate college a little bit larger. And so we were going to grow by about 15%. And so 15%, what does that mean? And, you know, the question was, well, who should make up that increased population? So when I first arrived at Yale, you know, the folks that fell into kind of our definition of first-gen low income really was a small percentage. It was about 8% of the incoming class. But Yale made a very specific commitment. The university leadership and the dean of admissions made a very specific commitment to say, we really want students like the ones you're meeting right now, students like you all. And so that's why, you know, we encourage you to shoot your shot. Definitely apply to Yale, you know, really, because schools are very anxious to have folks just like you. The idea being, thank you, I see the correction in the chat. So, you know, 59% of the class receives some level of financial aid. So right now, as you can see the demographics on the chart that's on the screen, you know, we are now, you know, I'm just moving my little chat box out of the way so I can actually see this. Okay, so that, you know, we're seeing 31% of the class identifies in some way, shape, either as first generation, so first in their family to attend college, that's about 20%, and about just under 20% are Pell eligible. So we've gone from about 8% to, you know, somewhere north of 20% overall of the student body. So 1 in 5 students walking around Yale's campus would identify as either a first generation in their first in the family to attend college or a low income student. So while, you know, Yale is awesome and kind of stunning in some respects, and you feel like, wow, there's a lot of wealth here, and there is, you know, but part of that is we're changing who is at Yale, and Yale is about the 4 or 5 years that you were here as an undergraduate. And we really want to make sure as much as possible that we try to smooth out the differences. And so part of what the community initiative does, part of what the Office of Financial Aid does, part of what, you know, happens in the colleges and the classroom is we are trying to smooth out that experience. So regardless of where you went to high school or how much money your family has, we are trying to make sure that everyone is eating in the dining hall. Everyone is engaged in activities in the residential college. The clubs and activities, as much as possible, we are trying to make sure that it doesn't really break the bank. But students definitely do work on campus, and they tend to work on average about 6 hours a week. You know, so there's some people who work a couple hours in a lab, and then there's some people who work on the high end, you know, like 12 hours a week or more, because they have multiple jobs on campus. But we really want to make sure that it's a balance so that you're able to do your work, you know, and if you want to stay up like Esther did until 2 in the morning working in the Buttery, chatting with people, that's also part of the learning experience. So we want to make sure that it will be shocking. And, you know, I will say as a, you know, as a low income student, you know, I never thought of myself as not having money, you know, like this was our family, and I thought we were comfortable, and I had the things I needed, and the people in my neighborhood that I hung out with were roughly the same. So I never thought of myself as a poor kid. But it wasn't until you get someplace and someone's like, well, you know, I have stuff that you don't, that I started to realize that. And that's going to happen in every environment, not just at Yale, but, you know, if you go to State College, you're going to encounter someone who's got a little bit more and a little bit different. But what we're trying to do is to make sure to help people navigate that. And that's part of what the first gen ambassadors help with, and the peer liaisons that Esther referenced, and our FROCOs. We talk about, all right, how do we help people navigate that? And just because you haven't experienced something or don't have something, your family doesn't own something, doesn't mean that you're any less than. I say frequently to new students that Yale doesn't make mistakes in the admissions process. And so when we accept you, we want you to be part of this community, and we want you to learn about difference. And where we can, as he said, we're trying to support you socially, academically, and financially. And so we're trying to smooth out that experience, knowing that people come from all different experiences when they come to Yale. Jorge, I'll throw it back to you so that you can get back into the questions. I kind of bogarted everything just then.
No, thank you so much. And actually, the first question I'm going to answer kind of plays into this whole exploration of the FGLI identity. I think for a lot of students who are FGLI, they don't really explore this part of the identity until they actually reach a college level environment. And the term itself, FGLI, is also relatively new. Whereas when I was a first year in the fall of 2015, this was a term that was not at all something that you heard around campus. And I think that's because there still is a lot of just like mystery when it comes to speaking openly about class at Yale, and in society as a whole. So for a part of the reason like why we want to create the community initiative and why we wanted to have such a strong presence on campus is to, one, make students realize that there are a lot of students now who have a very similar background and who can actually just have open conversations about being from a low-income background and kind of exploring this FGLI identity and what it actually means and whether or not they choose to identify with it. And a really good way to like kind of see the exploration of FGLI identities on campus is through this diagram here, where you can see the panic zone, the stretch zone, and the comfort zone. This is kind of a diagram that's used for having more or less like intense discussions and for certain topics that are hard to talk about. So for example, an individual could be in the panic zone if they completely do not want to talk about it. It's something that it stresses them out. They don't want to necessarily be open or like even like listen to other perspectives. And this for a lot of students, when they first kind of come to the realization that they come from a low income background, is this defensive wall that they put up where they're just like, oh, no, like I'm not low income. Like, no, like that's not me. And it's kind of like them being in a panicky zone. And when it actually comes down to exploring their identity, a majority of students, when they first enter Yale or enter like other college environments, they're in the stretch zone where they're willing to just listen and learn and kind of like grow and expand their knowledge when it comes to a certain idea or a certain part of their identity. For first-gen low-income students, that's very much so where they kind of grapple with like what it actually means to be from a first-gen low-income background and how that actually affects their either their college experience or just other certain avenues in their life. And then finally, there's the comfort zone, which is hopefully where every student ends up, regardless of whether or not they choose to use the FGLI identity as an identity marker. But in the comfort zone, they're, as you know, as it says, that they're super comfortable talking about their background. They're super comfortable like sharing that side of them with others and being honest and being open. And that's kind of the place where we currently are now as individuals ourselves. I can definitely say like me as a student, when I first started Yale, I was very much so like not very open to talking about my low income background or like my first gen identity. That was something that I thought there was a bit of, I guess, stigma when it came down to being open and being expressive of who I actually am. And honestly, with time, it's something that I realized that there wasn't any necessarily stigma associated with it. And there's no such kind of like deficiency when you have a first gen low income background. And for that reason, it was something that eventually I was able to navigate from a panic zone to a stretch zone of learning to an eventual comfort zone of just being honest with anyone, regardless of whether or not they shared a similar background to me. And whether or not a student chooses to, claim to be FGLI or use that as a forefront of their identity when they describe themselves is something that's completely up to the individual. We are very conscious that every student thinks differently and every student will choose to identify differently. And for that reason, like we don't put any stress on current students to be super vocal if they don't want to be about their FGLI background. But something that we want students to be like conscious of is that knowing more about what that background actually entails and how it affects certain experiences will actually just make things or navigating certain spaces a lot easier. A good example that I have of that is that I think a lot of first-gen low-income backgrounds develop this level of self-reliancy in high school or middle school. You know, for a lot of students who have a first-gen low-income background, they, you know, navigate AP like courses by themselves or honors level courses by themselves, or they figure out how to study for the ACT and ACT by themselves. And if you're a senior, you're probably navigating like how to actually apply for colleges and what a personal statement is and what actually you have to do to apply for colleges. And it's this level of self-reliancy where you're just like, okay, I might not understand how to do it, but I figure it out and I'll figure it out how to do it by myself. And something that happens a lot on campus is that that level of self-reliancy that students carry is brought with them to campus. And for me personally speaking, that level of self-reliancy, when I started to struggle academically, was a reason like why it impeded me from actually asking for help and asking others for help. Kind of a mixture of also feeling like an imposter and feeling like I didn't belong here at Yale. And you know, if I was feeling like I wasn't capable enough to keep up academically, and I reached out to tutoring, I saw that as a concrete way of showing that I didn't belong here on campus. And honestly, like it was just something that, because I wasn't open about my first gen low income background and wasn't willing to like talk to people about my struggles, I definitely struggled for more than I had to. And that was something that, looking back to, I could have been so much more proactive about having honest conversations with so many people who were just honestly willing to help and willing to listen. And I was just so stuck in my head that like, because certain things had worked out the way they had worked out up until that point in my life, that's just the way things were. And that's the way things were gonna have to be for the rest of my life. And I think one thing that I really gained from exploring my FGLI identity was just this openness and this willingness to ask for help. And there wasn't anything wrong with asking for help. And I think a lot of students who do have some kind of background when it comes to knowing about Yale or knowing about how like elite institutions operate, they'll tell you that making those connections are instrumental. And like going to office hours, which is just where you go and talk to professors, whether or not you have questions or not, is a good way of making connections. And, you know, I really saw tutoring as a bad thing when I was a first year or a sophomore in college. And as the years went on, I realized that it wasn't, and it was something that everyone was doing. And I was the only one like not actually using these resources that were created for everyone. But I just had this like really strong idea of like what they were, that honestly, if I had just looked at it through a different lens, I would have had a much easier time academically during my first couple of semesters here at Yale. Which is why like we want to be just super conscious of having that exploration with your FGLI identity. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Dean Howard to talk about expenses.
So expenses, you know, so one of the things, and some of these things are popping up in the Q&A as well, the reality is, as we all know, college is expensive. This is definitely something that obviously you're thinking about, your family is thinking about. But there are definitely some, you know, and these are some just general numbers that you're seeing on the screen right now. The reality is, there are going to be expenses no matter where you go to college, whether you take the bus across town to go to college, or if you come across the country, and go attend a four-year institution like Yale. So there's going to be expenses related to your books, and this is always the one that's a big shocker for our students. And Jorge and I were just having a conversation last week about this, but this idea that, in high school, you get the chemistry textbook or the history book, and that's part of the what they issue in class. In college, students are responsible for, buying the books for their class, and whether that's an English course or a chemistry course or history course. And so, that's an expense that every college student's going to incur. Part of, food, feeding yourself, unless you're living at home and commuting to school, you're going to be responsible for feeding yourself. And if you're living on campus and eating in the dining hall, or if you're living, off campus someplace, you're still going to be responsible. And then obviously you got to have that fresh gear. So we want to make sure that there are certain expenses that are going to be universal. Part of what we do here at Yale's, particularly for those students who qualify for our financial aid, we factor in some aspect of support, thinking about you know, how much the books cost or how much travel is cost or what some of the living expenses. And that's part of your overall financial aid package. Obviously, depending on your aid level, you know, again, you know, the sticker price that you see when they say how much it costs to go to Yale or Penn State or any other school is not ultimately what your family ends up paying. And so it's a very individualized, and I know that there's a session related to kind of financial aid to talk through some of the nitty gritty of that. But, you know, one of the things that I hope that you take away from this conversation tonight is Yale is a lot more affordable than you think it is. One of the questions that popped up in the chat is, you know, we were talking about debt. And I know that debt is one of the things that I think terrifies lots of high school students, college students, and their families. You know, about 86% of Yale students graduate with zero debt. You know, that is the inverse of what the kind of the national statistics are. Those who do graduate with some debt, it is generally on average less than $10,000, $15,000, which is, you know, shocking when you hear students talking about incurring hundreds of $1,000s of debt to earn a four-year degree. So our financial aid, when you actually look through it, Yale is a place where not only are we encouraging you to kind of shoot your shot and apply and look at the school and look at other competitive schools, and we hope that you come to Yale, but also just really looking at what the real-time costs would be. You know, I worked at another, you know, top 10 university before coming to Yale. And I remember having a conversation with a family whose daughter had been accepted at Yale and been accepted at that institution. That institution, both the parents were alums of that institution. They wanted their daughter to follow in their footsteps. But when they matched up the aid packages from the two schools, Yale came out $9,000 per year cheaper to come to Yale. And I said, as much as I love that school and I love these parents, and I would love to work with their student at that school, if money is, you know, such a significant concern, to get a high quality, outstanding education and experience at Yale for, you know, saving themselves, you know, $36,000, to me, that was a no-brainer. So, you know, one of the things that I encourage you all to do is to think that, you know, in many ways, Yale may be more affordable than some of the public flagship institutions in your state, and probably more affordable than most of the private institutions that you'll encounter in your process. So, but there are going to be some fixed costs, travel, food, clothing, technology, that you're going to incur no matter whether you go to the college around the corner or you come to Yale. I know that there's some more questions in here, and I you know, you don't really need to hear from the old head. It's really great that we've got some current students and recent grads. It would be great, you know, if Esther, Alejandro, if you would talk a little bit about kind of the student life experience, you know, clubs, activities, and then also just what's it like to be a student on campus, coming from kind of either first in your family to attend college or a low income background, and kind of, is there some shock in that adjustment?
Yeah, I can start off. My roommate is washing clothes downstairs, so y'all might hear the washer dryer go off, but that's okay. Yeah, so something that, thanks Jenny, something that Alejandro and I are both a part of actually is Ballet Folclórico Mexicano de Yale. So it's a group on campus that is student-led, undergrads, and we have some graduate students too, that like we perform Mexican folkloric dance, and I am really proud to be a part of the group because we are actually, like, I think we celebrated our 20th anniversary the fall of my first year. So we put on this like big, pretty show, or no, sorry, the spring of my first year. So spring of 2018. And it was pretty great to see the older members return. And also just to see the community that like enveloped us right when we got to campus. I think that's something that also makes being a student at Yale so much more like great, because no matter like if you're first year or second year, if you're joining a community that you really like that is really warm and caring, like most communities at Yale are. I think they really make a space for you. So I'm glad that I am a part of that. And unfortunately, because we're all still, stuck at home or, online, we can't really get together to practice. But we do have like bi-weekly meetings online now. And that's always nice to keep the momentum going. But I think generally over the past 3 years, getting like really close with friends that are a part of my extracurricular groups is a highlight. And I think it's a highlight for a lot of students because it's a way for you to forget about classes for a while and just focus on like stuff that makes you happy. And so I noticed I didn't say my major. So I'm majoring in ethnicity, race, and migration. And so a lot of the clubs that I'm in overlap like with the major. A lot of students that I am really good friends with are also in the major and in a lot of the same clubs. And so it's nice to like see each other in like different aspects, like in class and also just like in clubs. And that's been really great. But yeah, I can pass it to Alejandro if he has anything else to say.
Yeah, I think Esther brought up something really great with BF, and I think it's just emblematic of kind of the type of culture that is present in many student organizations. I think the number is over 500 student organizations, if I remember correctly. It's just a community and how welcoming these communities are, right? In a daily day, you find yourself working so much, and having an extracurricular activity as something on your calendar, just as something that you do that is different, whether it be dance, whether it be meeting, whether it be whatever type of activity it may be with a student organization is, I think, really, really great. And I think it's something that is needed as part of the Yale College experience. It just makes for a well-rounded experience in terms of the people that you meet. I've definitely found myself in a situation where a lot of the friends that I do have are based and from student organizations, right? So, aside from BF, I'm also a member of a Latino fraternity. It's called La Unidad Latina, Lambda Upsilon Lambda Fraternity Incorporated. Being able to have that community has been really, really important to me, as well as the friends that I've made from BF. It was really, really great to be a part of that community. And I think also what's really cool about Yale is that as you change years at Yale, as you become an upperclassman, the type of student organizations that you're involved in and how you're involved in them changes as well. So it's not like this stagnant state. The tradition is that usually at Yale, sophomores and juniors have executive positions in student organizations. So a lot of times, this is a time where students are really, really focused on the leadership skills. And first year is really that time to have fun, really enjoy the social aspects of the organization. And then senior year, in terms of more the social life at Yale, there's things like senior societies. So I'm talking about that now because I'm a senior and I'm a society. So it definitely makes for a very different experience every single year with the fact that, the structure at Yale and just the traditions that we have here at Yale have made it such that there's a life outside of classes and research. And it has really made for really, really strong communities and really strong support networks of individuals that are all really great and think very, very differently from me, which has made the experience very unique.
Yeah, and something I want to add to that is just the fact that there is this large Yale community that just everyone is a part of, but within the university itself, there are a lot of various little distinct communities that you can join. And obviously the FGLI community is one that is is expanding quickly as the years go on, or especially as the last 5 years have happened. But there are various points of your own personal intersection that you can actually explore in other communities. And just because you're part of one community does not mean you can't be a part of the other. For me specifically, I was from the very first day just enamored by my residential college. There was just something about it that I just completely fell in love with, and it was something that I knew I wanted to spend more time there and be a very strong member of the community. So yeah, I worked a lot of different jobs in my residential colleges where I worked at the Buttery, and just like I said, I was there a lot of the nights of the week. And it's also those mozzarella sticks and quesadillas are the main reason why I had to buy new pants in my first year of Yale. But then eventually as the years went on, you can start just like having more higher up roles, as Alejandro mentioned. So eventually I became like president of the student activities committee, and I would help do like student government stuff within the college, such as like planning dances and formals and just like other like community bonding events. And eventually I became an aide for the head of college house, and, you know, just like rose the ranks there. But that was just one very specific community that I joined and I was super happy in. And that being said, like, it was my main community, but I was still very much so present in other communities at Yale. And that's something that I'm very grateful for the fact that like you're not stuck in just one block or one group of people throughout your entire 4 years here, or however long you end up spending here. I mean, I'm currently in my 6th year and I'm still exploring different communities. And I think that's something that is very unique to Yale. And I think that whether you ask a student or an administrator, something that they'll always agree on is whenever someone asks like, why Yale, and like why do you choose to be at Yale, and like why do you choose to like continue working at Yale, or like why do you choose to like even like think of Yale, people are gonna 99% of the time say the people, whether they are like other students or other administrators or other faculty members. At the end of the day, like what makes Yale so unique and special, I guess, like other than the fact that like apparently we have great pizza here in New Haven, it's just that like the people really make it special, and the people themselves are very caring, and it's not a cutthroat environment, and it's a place where you can genuinely trust other people. And I think that's something that I very much so value, and very much so valued as a student, because as Esther mentioned, like this place can be difficult and it can be very hard. And like if you don't have those social or like those support systems in place right around you, like it's a very hard place to navigate. And part of the reason like why administratively like we have the community initiative is to provide some of those support systems for students who may or may not like struggle initially finding a support system.
So Jorge, could I just jump in and ask the question, because it popped up in the chat. You know, these are students in high school who are looking at Yale. What advice would the three of you have about this next steps in terms of applying, or how they should present themselves to any college, let alone Yale?
I can go first, because I think I have a very specific answer, and it's honestly like being genuine and being just who you are. I think various times when students think about applying to elite institutions, and specifically Yale, they think that the institution is looking for a specific mold of a student. And they think that if they have this checklist of just like, okay, I have the GPA, I have the test scores, like I have the extracurriculars, I'm a shoo-in. And something that like I've noticed through like just like talking to like my friends who were applying and you know eventually were students here, and just like also like now being an administrator, it's just that like Yale very much so focuses on the individual, and they really much so just like care about the fact that like you express who you are, and like you're not just like putting on this like front or this face of someone that you think they want to be, and ultimately like just knowing that like you yourself as an individual is more than enough to be at a place like Yale is something that I really can't stress enough. At the end of the day, like if you believe in yourself and you just really very much so show like how like genuine and kind of like strong set you are, like that's all that really matters.
Yeah, I think I actually have two pieces of advice, and one of them Jorge already gave him, which is being genuine and just the importance of doing that. You know, one thing that I like to think about is the fact that, and you probably, you'll get more information about the admissions process and such, but Esther and I actually did a program called First Year Scholars at Yale, and admissions came to us and kind of told us and kind of just validated why we were here at Yale. One of the things that they do is they spend so much time on your application that first, it'll be very, very easy to tell if something's not honest. And second of all, it just makes for a better story, right? If you're your genuine self. So in terms of like, you know, approaching your applications, that's probably one of the most important advice. Now, in terms of college, and as you're making these major decisions about where you're applying, how you're applying, and eventually where you end up going, is definitely trust your gut. And this is something that I wish I would have known when I was thinking about college and just the process of it. Is definitely trusting your gut. You're gonna have a lot of voices in your head and a lot of voices telling you what to do and how you should do it, from people like in your family, your teachers, your mentors, which is all really, really good advice. But at the end of the day, it's really important to trust your gut and do what you want to do, you know, and that pattern of being yourself. So yeah, definitely. So be yourself and make sure you trust your gut.
I can add something super quick. Sorry. I know we're running out of time. Something more like that you can do right away is I would suggest getting a lot of readers for your personal statement. I think becoming more comfortable, like having people like see who you are on paper. It really helped me being like knowing that people were giving me feedback constantly on like something that like, because honestly that's what like the colleges are seeing, like your personal statement, and it's as good as you make it. And to make it better, I would suggest getting a lot of readers so that you can really hone in on the stuff that you want to emphasize in like your personal story. So that's just a quick bit of advice.
Okay, thank you. Jorge, you're going to take us home?
Yeah, thanks so much. I really want to quickly thank Esther and Alejandro for being present today, and for being willing to just be vocal and share about their personal experiences. I also really want to thank Dean Howard for being present. I know he works really long days and it's a little past his bedtime, so I appreciate it. And also I really want to quickly thank the admissions office for having these events. I think that having a multicultural open house is something that is really needed at a time like this. So just being able to share our experiences and share our stories is something that I'm super happy to be able to do. So yeah, if y'all have any more questions, whether they be about the admissions process or about just like first-gen low-income stuff at Yale, please send us an email. You can search us on our website by just Googling, or I'll put it in the chat as well, like the community initiative at Yale, or just first-gen low-income at Yale, and we will pop up. So please reach out to us. We love talking to students. And yeah, thanks. Have a good night.
And if you're of legal age, register and vote. Important.
Please vote.
Thank you all.